Hello everyone, welcome to this new lesson. Today I will talk about deploying documentation website with GitHub Pages. Let's start talking about what is GitHub Pages. GitHub Pages is a free tool that lets you put online a website directly from your GitHub repository. It's really useful for things like project documentation, personal portfolios, or a small website that don't need a backend. How it works. You create your website using files like HTML, CSS or JavaScript. Then you upload everything into your GitHub repository. GitHub takes care of the rest, so it builds your site and hosts it in a public web address like https://your-user.github.io/the name of your repo. Let's talk about the main features. So first, you don't need a server or a backend because GitHub hosts everything for you. Then it works also with your version control, so every time you push some changes on your repo, your site updates automatically. You can also use your own custom domains, and it's completely free to use, and GitHub provides also a secure access HTTPS to your site. Let's look at some use cases. GitHub Pages is great for teams publishing their documentation guides about some product, developers sharing personal projects or project pages, and open source organization showing how the tools or project works. It's really easy to use and it integrates and works well with GitHub, so it's perfect for both personal and professional projects. Now let's see how I use it in my Google Summer of Code 2024 project. Okay, so this is my Google Summer of Code Liquid Galaxy Space Visualizations project, where I also added a documentation website that have been hosted with GitHub Pages. And also this documentation is generated with a tool that we will see later in this lesson. So here we have a new documentation that explains every part of the code base, so every class, every method, and it explains also how the methods are interconnected, so the types in common, what is a specific ad hoc class made of. So this documentation is accessible from here, this link. So the documentation website starts from the README. So here we can see different sections such as about with a quick description of the project, the requirements, the building from source, so you can build the application on your own, and then a small tutorial on the first step to use the application. On the left you can see all the classes of the code base, so the new contributor can learn about the Liquid Galaxy architecture with a practical example. So as an example, we can look at the NAS API class that is the responsible of interacting with the NAS API, and we can look at every method of the class. We can see a quick description, we can see the parameters, and we can see how it works. So after NAS API, another case of this documentation, it to helps new Liquid Galaxy contributor understand how the connection works with the Liquid Galaxy rig. So the contributor can look at the connect method, disconnect, to try to learn how to use and build application interactive with the Liquid Galaxy rig. That's all, let's move to the next section. Okay, now let's look at the different GitHub Pages plans. So GitHub Pages is available for free to all GitHub users, but there are a few limitations depending on your account type. If you are using a free GitHub account, your project must be stored in a public repository to use GitHub Pages and host your sites. If you require to have a private repository, you need to have a premium GitHub plan, such as a team or enterprise. But however, for the majority of open source projects where the repository is public, there is no problem to host your documentation, your site for free. Now let's have a focus on GitHub Pages used with dartdoc. What is dartdoc? Dartdoc is a API documentation tool that reads and scans your code and comments to generate a website with a clean, searchable and effective documentation. This is a really useful combination for your Flutter project. Let's see the workflow. So let's see how the process works. First, you develop your Flutter project as usual. So as you code it, make sure to write a clean documentation with your dartdoc code, and this code must follow the dartdoc guidelines that are linked to this link, and it's called effective dart, the style of your code. And then thanks to that style, dartdoc can effectively generate and understand your code. So it will generate the documentation files, HTML and other files in a really effective way. So then we will write also the README of our project, and then with the dartdoc tool we will combine everything to generate our documentation website. Then we will push our generated files to the GitHub repository, and then using GitHub Pages we will host publicly the documentation website. So it's a simple and professional way to keep your technical documentation online and always up to date. So let's see how dartdoc works. First we need to activate it, and then we can generate our documentation. So the documentation page in a HTML file will represent a class of a part of our code. Let's see an example, a demo of a Flutter project dartdoc generation. Okay, so here we have our dartdoc demo project. This is a very simple task manager, and here we have some classes that are commented following the dartdoc documentation guidelines. For example, here we have a task types class, and we have different classes, for example work task, that has been commented with an example with a short explanation of the responsibility of the class, and as you can see the comments are interlinked with the attributes of the class. So this will be useful to our documentation when the user will navigate to classes from classes using this interconnection. Another important file is the README, that will be the entry point of our documentation. This is a really important file that should contains a short description of the project, a tutorial, and everything that the user needs to use the project. Then let's see how we can activate our dartdoc. So first we need to open a terminal, make sure that is opened in the same directory as your project. Let's run the activation command, that is this one, that will install all the package needed to dartdoc to generate our documentation. Then we can run our documentation generation command, that is this one, dart pub global run dartdoc. This command will scan every file of our project and will generate the documentation based on our comments, our also the README, and how we have structured the project. So the documentation will follow our code. So if your code is good structured, is good commented following the guidelines, the documentation will be clean and effective. Those files will be generated in a doc folder that will appear in your project directory, as you can see here. Now the process finished. So as we can see in the doc folder, we have a lot of files. So every class of our project will correspond to a folder, and another important file is the index.html, that is the entry point of our documentation website. Now let's open it in a browser. Okay, so here we have our index opened in a browser. As you can see, the file is stored locally on my hard disk, and here we have the HTML of the README, so the user can understand your project. Here you can also add some pictures, some example, whatever you want to help the user to understand your project. As you can see here in the top right, you can also switch a theme of the documentation site. The user can also search in your documentation for specific classes, specific methods, and as you can see in the left, we have also a menu which with all the classes in our project. For example, let's take a look of class documentation. We can see the properties, we can see the methods of the class. Let's look at a bigger class. As we saw, they were the work task. Here we have an example of the usage of this class. We have a short explanation. We can see that everything is interlinked, so if we can move, we can navigate our project using this link. Also there we can see the methods are commented, are interlinked with everything, and this local site is also linked to external website. For example, if you want to understand a bool type, what is bool type, it will link automatically to the API flutter documentation. So the user, if he wants, he can also understand everything more than your project. So that's everything. Of course, in this case, the documentation is quite short, but on bigger projects is really useful for the user have this, because he can understand quickly and better your project and your code base. Now let's see how we can publish this website using Github Pages online. Okay, so now we will need to push our doc folder to the GitHub repository. So first, to use GitHub Pages, we will need to rename this doc folder to docs, and then we will move all the files inside the API folder in the docs folder. Okay, we can remove the API folder that is empty. Then we can create a commit with the docs folder. So let's first enter git status. Here we will see that the docs folder is not pushed in our repository, so we will create add it to a commit. Then we will create our commit with git commit -m documentation. Let's check. Okay, now we have created our commit, but we need to push it with the git push. Let's wait for some seconds. Okay, here we are. So let's see from the GitHub view what we can see and how we can enable GitHub Pages. Okay, so here we are in our GitHub repository. We can see the commit that have been done 1 minute ago with the documentation folder. So now let's make sure to have our repository set to public. To do this, you can go to settings, general, and change the visibility here and change to public. Okay, now that it's public, we can start creating our documentation website, enabling GitHub Pages. So let's start from settings, pages. Here in source, we must select the deploy from a branch, And then here in the branch section we can select the main in this case, or if you have pushed the commit in another branch, you must select it. Here in the second menu we can select the /docs directory, and it's where, as you remember, we put all the documentation HTML files. Let's click save. Okay, now the GitHub Pages is building the website. As you can see, you will see a pending message here. It will require some minutes depending on how is big your project. Okay, now the process finished successfully. Here we can see that all checks have passed. So let's go to the action tab to see the jobs of the tool. We can click on pages here, and then click on deploy job. Here under the complete job tab we can see our public URL. Okay, so this will be the public URL. As you can see, is made of your username.github.io / your repository name, in this case dartdoc demo, and is secured by HTTPS. This page is public, accessible to every contributor who can consult and learn more about your project and learn your code base. Then is a best practice to add this link into our about section. So how we can do it, we can click this setting icon here, and then we can check this option, use your GitHub Pages website. So the website link will be added here. Let's click save. So the link of our documentation will appear here. So from now, every commit, every push to our repository will dynamically update our documentation website without taking care of the deployment. So that's how GitHub Pages works. Okay, so in this lesson we have talked about what is GitHub Pages, who can use it, so the difference between the different GitHub accounts. We have seen the Flutter documentation workflow, so we can integrate GitHub Pages with dartdoc tool to generate our documentation from the Flutter project code base. So we have seen also we can deploy that website using GitHub Pages online. So what's next? You can also learn new things that I don't mention in this lesson, so such as custom domains, so you can add your own more professional domains. You can also add some custom themes to the deployment of GitHub Pages, or you can find out more about a site generator that is a Jelly static tool that is an advanced tool of GitHub Pages. Here you can see some useful links such as GitHub Pages example to explore how different contributors use this tool. You can see the dartdoc guidelines, so what are the guidelines of your code that must follow to effectively build your documentation using the dartdoc tool. You can see also here the dartdoc documentation link, and again the official GitHub Pages documentation. So that's all. I hope you like this presentation. I really suggest you to use GitHub Pages and also dartdoc in your Flutter projects to host and deploy your website very easily, quick, and also for free. Thanks for watching. If you still have questions, you can find me here on this email or on Discord. So I hope you like this video, and see you soon.